So without further ado, I'd like to briefly introduce our artists today. We're lucky to have Angelica Pozo and Corrie Slawson with us today. They're two local artists. Even most of you probably do know about them, but even if you don't think you know about them, you actually probably do know about them. Their work is, we're lucky to have their work in various locations around the region. And we're also lucky today to have them as both of them have studios in their homes, and they're sort of like on the large end of studios. And so we think you'll get some inspiration and some ideas from their presentations today. Just briefly, Landis had the opportunity to work with both of these artists in the past several years. With Angelica, we worked, for example, on the Winding Wall at the Art and Soul of Buckeye Park at East 118th and Buckeye. This is another winding wall, not the one at Art and Soul, but we, that project, it was a component of a project that turned a bed of weeds in an adjacent parking lot into a really beautiful community gathering place that's available for everyday passive use or also suitable for organized events. Also, through the City of Cleveland's public art program, we had the opportunity to work with Angelica on the two of the art components at the Collinwood Rec Center on Lakeshore Boulevard. And one of the artworks is right at the entrance. It consists of several concrete-filled shapes that function as chairs, tables, and game boards. It's beautiful, tile-covered artworks look as good today. This is a picture of them that's up now, as they did when they were installed 10 years ago. And as you can see, they do get used. Corrie is the artist behind the kiosks in the warehouse district that make up the warehouse district anthology. This is one of my favorite artworks in the entire region. And these were installed as part of a streetscape in the warehouse district. And as part of the project, these kiosks were originally thought of as informational kiosks, that would tell you where the restaurants are, where the bars are, where you could sit down, things like that. But Corrie really persuasively advocated for them to be like real museum quality artworks, which they are, and they had visual interest and color to the neighborhood, and also some really useful and I'd say sometimes surprising information. Both of the artists we're talking to today have both studio and public art practices, and they both are experienced working with fabricators, or in some cases doing their own fabrication. So we think we'll have a lot for you to learn from them today. So we're going to actually let them do the main part of their introductions, and we're interested in seeing their workspaces and hearing about the thinking behind their artwork and the evolution of their artwork. So I'm going to turn it over now to Angelica, who may be that way or that way on your screen. So welcome, Angelica.
Thank you. Let's see. I don't see myself in a speaker view for some reason when I'm talking, but
I don't think you will, but we can see you though.
You can see me, okay. So anyway, welcome to my studio. I have a studio that is a large building behind my house. I've been here for 20 years now. I was very lucky to land. This is in south end of Tremont, and I got a price just before everything blew up, or just while things blew up, but I'm very lucky to be here. I have, the house has some rental property in it, so that helps me pay for my, help me pay my mortgage, and now helps me sustain my studio. I do the public art, as Vince mentioned, but I also do sculptural work, which some of that was shown in the slides just now. I work as an artist, teaching artist with Center for Arts Learning and Art House. And I also do some studio work for holiday sales. So I do a wide variety of things. Many irons and many fires is what I call it, to be able to be a self-employed artist. So I'm gonna flip the camera, I think. Let's see, flip the camera. Here we go. And we'll start the studio tour. So it's just hard for me to see. Oh, there we go. Now I can see what I'm showing you. So here, this is the front room. I have 3 major rooms, and and studio. So you can look down the length of my table. This is a 24-foot long table, so I can do long murals here. Up front here are some of my studio like consignment work or studio sale, fun, inexpensive work that I do. This kind of grows out of my my public art project process. I use a lot of already pre-made tiles for my public art, and so that made me start using pre-made dishes and decorating them. But you can see the length of that. On the left, there's a lot of mess of other stuff, mosaic pieces. That's a rolling table to roll tiles out on, shelves to store things. Big mess. Over here is where I've started to do some video teaching for distance learning. So I have a camera set up over here. So that's the front room. And then we can move into the middle room. The middle room here, I have some artworks displayed here or stored. You can see a lot of artwork on the shelves. This is over here where I prep for my teaching artist class. So I might cut paper or prepare materials to go out to teach. I have some more artworks.
Angelica, do you work with anyone in your shop, or is it all you?
It's pretty much all me. If I have a commission that I need some extra hands in, I might bring someone in, or I do have some people that I might have come in to help me with some things here and there. But for the most part, it's all me. I wish I had a little helper to help me clean up after my messes, but since I do so many different things and I'm not always here, sometimes I'm going out, it just has not worked out for me financially and also physically to be able to have someone working with me. So, oh well, I wish I had some clones. Back here, the third room, that's where I have my water. So here I do grouting, glazing. Over here I was set up to do some decals, to apply some decals. So I do clean up some areas here and there to work, as needed to work. And every now and then I have enough free time to get it all cleared up, but not so much lately. So you can see, give me a tour of that. And then the last but not least is there's a garage attachment to the building. And this is where I have my kilns. I keep my kilns in here. And then back here are chemicals. I have different glazed chemicals over here, so that's separate from my workspace. And more storage of tiles, different tiles from other projects, packing materials. So that's the grand tour. Altogether, I have about 2,100 square feet in the brick and block building, part of the building, and about 800 square feet in that galvanized steel garage attachment. So,
how long have you been in this space?
I've been 20 years.
Wow.
Almost exactly 20 years I bought this place. And the mortgage is paid for. Woohoo! So I'm working my way back.
And I remember you told us before you bought this space, you worked downtown and you had some shared spaces, right?
Yes, I was sharing a space. Initially, I was in a tower press building before it was renovated. And then I was in art craft building. I moved with those people to the art craft building. And then I'm gonna flip back to me, I think maybe. And then I had a studio, rented my own storefront space in Tremont, but then that was getting more and more expensive, and I knew if I didn't own something soon, I'd have to move to a different location. And I'm not from Cleveland. Tremont is the only neighborhood I've lived in since I moved here in '84, moved to Cleveland in '84. So I was not really looking forward to getting used to a new neighborhood. So I'm so happy that I was able to land this place and still stay in the neighborhood that I've grown to love and, be my home.
Absolutely. Well, very cool. Maybe we'll turn it over to Corrie and have her tour, and then we'll bring it all together and everyone can ask questions you know, of both Angelica and Corrie. But feel free, you know, if you have any questions specifically about, you know, what you're seeing or something, or a quick question, feel free to drop it in the chat and we can weave it in.
Hi, should I start?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. Hi, welcome everybody. I'm using my phone, so I can't see anybody. So I just thank you for coming. I'm starting in my print shop. My studios are also in my home, and we've been in this house 17, almost 18 years. And so this is another situation where our mortgage, where we live, is wrapped up in my studio practice. And so that basically I have a kind of a huge fear of losing studios from having gone to art school in New York and basically getting kicked out of apartments left and right as neighborhoods. Yeah, as neighborhoods changed, and you know, so it's really secure feeling in some ways to have it wrapped up in my living space. So I'm going to turn around the camera too. There we go. Okay, so this is sort of space number one. I'll start over here. It's Ping Pong Press. I can only thank Liz Moggins for coming up with that name, because the centerpiece of this entire print shop is based on this ping pong table, which is both a wonderful recreational usage thing for a family, but also a great place to store screens, inks, and then other, you know, items. We have flat files on the other side. Central to this print shop is this etching press. It's a 1973 Charles brand etching press. And also this exposure unit, darkroom area. And this used to be one of those creepy Cleveland Heights basement toilets, and I had them take it out when the toilet broke. And we put in this rinse out area for screen printing. So basically we have, and when I say we, I work in partnership with Karen Beckwith, who is a Tamron master lithographer down here in Ping Pong Press. So we have lithography, etching, and screen printing. And to get back to public art and the work that you're looking at right here, the whole reason I was able to put this in was because of a commission by the Columbus Metropolitan Library to make a mural in the driving park branch, brand new building in that neighborhood. There was the quiet room's the central room where people can go and read while it's quiet. And so these are some proofs. I basically made the entire mural here in my studio and in this shop, and then had three wonderful helping assistants who helped me. Basically, we had to do 80 passes on a fresh wall, and we couldn't make any mistakes. So we basically had to practice it, take the paper, look at it, and then do it again, do it again, do it again, and finally have final screens shot. So I was able to put in this print shop, but I really had to in order to execute that project. So it shares with laundry. It shares with, you know, my family. I mean, this is a domestic space. So there's both challenges and, you know, great things about that. So I'm going to bear with me while I walk up 3 flights of stairs, which is part of my practice, is walking up these 3 flights of stairs after I've shot screens, or that's my bird, or, you know, done some of the paper-based or textile-based work downstairs in the print shop. I switch to my mixed media practice, which is drawing, painting, performance sometimes, and I come up to my painting studio, and I'm always out of breath. Pardon me. I'm going to switch again. And then this is my painting studio. This is basically why we bought the house, because it was pretty much like this when we bought it. So everything else had to be fixed, but I had a big studio space where I can make my paintings. I do a lot of table work. I hang stuff up. Mixed media is the name of the game. So now I'm out of breath. I'm really sorry. And that, I guess that's the studio tour part of that. Yeah.
Corrie, how often do you have to go back and forth between the two? And what did you do before you had built out that basement press?
Great question. I'm trying to switch. Here we go. For years, what I did was I did the old fashioned like punk band t-shirt making with a single light bulb in my basement to shoot a screen. It meant that I couldn't get as much photographic detail, but it allowed me to kind of use screen printing as a first step in a lot of my work. And then this space always kind of had a multifunctional, it hasn't changed too much, but it's become even more of a painting studio. Quick thing I want to note, because I know Angelica had talked about it too. So my practice is definitely like I am in my home with my family. So I don't use any high VOC solvents or chemicals. When I do oil paint, I use a product called Estisol 242, which is an ester-based solvent that's made in the Netherlands, and it has no flash point and no smell. So that's what I use we use that in the litho stuff, and I use it in oil painting, and I make my own Damar varnishes. So just, keeping toxicity down in a very domestic space where there's a child, I really think about that a lot too.
Thanks so much, Corrie. If you guys want to switch to gallery view so you can see everyone's faces, if you happen to be able to turn on your camera, that would be awesome. If not, it's okay. But we'll open it up to questions. Maybe I'll start it out and just ask how you guys, is there a difference in how you both approach public art versus your studio art, or do they, inform each other? Could you just talk about the differences and similarities to how you approach things?
Well, I definitely have my approach to public art and my own studio art is definitely very different. The public art, the public art takes me on voyages that I would never have thought of on my own. My own studio work is inspired by plants and nature and flowers and color and that kind of energy. But the public art takes me to find out about history, local history, or history of aviation, or about important different people in the community, and then also I am thinking of the space, and when we run through before, I was relaying how working with space to me is very much like working with ceramics and function, and the idea of how a work functions in a space. And so all those different, there's some similarities, but the public art by far takes me into directions that I would never on my own generate, and I really enjoy that.
Yeah, I second that.
Corrie, I have a question for you. Though our event today is kind of studio based, one thing I'd like to ask you about is your just your inspiration, which is is not really home based. I just love the way you make use of the Cleveland cityscape. Both it's beautiful and it's heartbreaking parts, and just maybe I don't want to put you on the spot. Could you talk about that for just a second?
Sure. My practice over the last 15 years really has evolved to be initially a photo-based, where I would just kind of take pictures on my commutes, walking commutes, driving commutes. For years, I worked at Zygote Press. For years, I worked at the Maltz Museum for Jewish Heritage. So I've worked at different sort of places, and when I started commuting out to Kent State for my master's in 2004-05, I was really struck by how provincial I am, and that I don't tend to go like west of Warren Road or east of like Warrensville Center Road. Like I pretty much stay in the city and inner ring suburbs, and I was stunned by the amount of sprawl, highway development, houses just kind of popping up in farmland. So a lot of my work did and still does deal with urban, suburban, ex-urban sprawl, and the sort of basis of that. So that's the sort of quick version of how that evolved and how it remains. Lately, my work's been more about actually like climate change directly, but I think all of these social, socioeconomic, racial, all of these issues are what is causing climate change in part. These are symptoms. It's a symptom of other things that as a society we should work on, I think. So my work was always through my eyes, through this idea of what was my experience, and not trying to put, sort of my, it was like a journalistic way of looking at it, but it's lately become a lot more personal and a lot mouthier and a lot more sort of less tame, honestly. And that's a big like difference between the way I work in public art versus my own studio. I think, like Angelica said, I've also been brought upon and taken in amazing places, histories, and been allowed to basically interpret other stories or stories' histories in order to execute those public art works without as much editorializing as maybe I do in my own studio practice.
And Angelica, you use a lot of, you do a lot of research on key figures in history and things like that. Can you talk about your research process a little bit?
Yeah, I before I start to kind of really solidify what I want to do with the piece, I just go through a period of just sort of taking it in and just taking in information. And so I'm thinking in mind now of a piece I did last year for in West Park for an African-American community, that a little pocket of a community that is little known, that there's this West Side contingency of African-American community, and they kind of were their own stewards of their own history, because there is not really a lot of history out there. So having to then talk to different community members and have people bring me their booklets that that were printed, that were from their community. And so sometimes I'll be getting things from individuals and learning, and those interactions are priceless. And the project I did in Huntsville, Alabama, commemorating two men who were instrumental in desegregating schools in Alabama, and also one started Alabama A&M University. And so I got to meet Dr. Herford, who was the one instrumental in getting the Alabama schools desegregated. He was the one that held his 6-year-old son's hand and walked under the gauntlet of the National Guards aiming their guns at him. And so it's like, you get to meet some really interesting and important people, and to tell stories that are really need to be told. So
yeah. And then I love how your artist statement, in your artist statement, you say public art is most successful when coexisting with the space and the people who use it, and not just serving as the lovely carnation on a handsomely tailored suit. Can you both talk a little bit about how you think integrating public art into a space, and how you think about that? How you think, so you kind of touched on you researching a space and influence on what the art is, but maybe talk a little bit more about like how you think about like it in a space and situating it within the space.
Well, I know that thinking about the project I did at the law library, Cleveland State University Law Library, I remember having at that point, because sometimes you are given a site, sometimes like this is where we want something, we want it right here. But then sometimes, and also at the airport, the project at the airport, those were two There's a couple other too where it's like we want art and we don't really have any inclination as far as where, all that. And so I like to look for a space that just seems that it needs that the work fits into, instead of looking necessarily for the biggest clear space, the big open space that where I can put my mural on. I might look for a place that just seems that it will be the interactions or the use of the space or how the space feels will be augmented by adding a work. So it's a little bit different of a mindset than I think someone coming with a painting and say, well, I want my painting in the biggest, clearest space. Sometimes what I do might fit into little niches in different spaces and not be one big statement.
Yeah. What about you? Yeah. What about you, Corrie?
It's the same in my case. With actually, I'm going to say all of the public art that I've done, there has been a place where they wanted it to go, or like in the case of the warehouse district kiosks, there were those shapes. Those were the kiosks. They were going to be made in a certain way. There was a budget for them to be a certain way. And so in all of those cases, I've adjusted my practice to the space or to the needs of the space. In the case of the Columbus Library, there were a lot of things going on at the same time in that work. First of all, the HVAC was right in the middle of where the mural would be. So the room was built without a consideration that there would ever be anything hung in there, which is fine. But what it meant is that I was going to have to integrate things like a fire, whatever symbol or signal, the HVAC. And then that room is really meant for people to go in, work quietly. There will be tables and chairs in there. So really, I wanted everything to be right at a comfortable eye level, and also to allow for them to be able to rearrange that room as the library needed it. Also, that is in Driving Park, Columbus, which is a predominantly African-American community in a city I'm not from. So it was really important to me to find out what the users of the library wanted to see, wanted to live with. And then at the same time, I found out that they have this wonderful digital photography club. Kids, I would say it's K through 12, but mostly the kids that were using it were middle school kids. And the title of that piece is Driving Park as Seen Through the Eyes of AJ, Sarah, Lauren, Michaela, the girls who generously worked with me to show me their neighborhood. We walked around, we would take pictures together, we would talk about color, we would talk about what they see, what they want to see in the mural. And I said, in exchange for your generosity, what can I do? What do you want is there anything you want to be part of, learn? So I would go down to Columbus every 2 weeks, and we would do some workshops together in a place that had no real water. So it was really kind of, they put a lot of trust in me, the whole system, to bring in buckets of water and do screen printing workshops in very clean, brand new spaces. And we didn't make a mess. And we did paper lithography, we did painting, we did drawing, we did more photo, like we talked a lot about translating photos into screen printing or other means. So in that case, I mean, that was such a special project. And I was honestly just relieved and honored that it's liked and that it reflected what the community wanted in their space, because it's their space.
Yeah. We have a couple questions in the chat, and I think both of them really are getting at, Michelle asked, how did you get into public art when you have no experience? And then there's another question, do you ever do self-initiated public art projects, or do you primarily respond to calls? So maybe could you talk about, like, maybe you're starting out into public art and how you've gotten into it a little bit. And then also if you ever respond to calls or really do more like commission-based invitational works and things like that.
My first public art, I think, was helped by the fact that I was doing artist teaching and then with the Ohio Arts Council and doing mural projects in the schools. I had also just done my first tile piece, which was, you saw in the tour, that's up in my studio. That's my first studio tile piece that I did. That was in 1991. And so I think, and then I did some mural projects, as I said, with the Ohio Arts Council in the schools. And so as far as like that first step, being able to, going from studio work to show that I can do a finished piece, even though those works in the schools were not my imagery, it did prove that I can see a project through and get something made and get it on the wall. So I think that helped me, at least the panel, the selection panel, have a trust that I can carry through. So that's when I have talks on that, I say to people to, to either, if you are able to do some kind of project, even though it's not your project, it might be a community project, it might not be your imagery, or even just do proposals, do your own little proposals for sites so they can see how you would translate your own work into a public artwork, even that is not realized. But if they can see a drawing or a plan, people can see what you're thinking.
Yeah, and I can attest for Land Studio, if we're reviewing proposals, like even a rendering, if someone submits, they haven't had experience doing public art, but they're submitting renderings or ideas, it is really helpful, and you can always put that in as like some precedent images. You can usually put in like ideas for future projects or something like that. What about you, Corrie?
I will say that, so my first official public art project was the Warehouse District Anthology, which we started in 2012, Vince. And we finished it last year. So, but what I absolutely drew on in my professional experience for that was my work on the International Spy Museum and the Maltz Museum for Jewish Heritage. That was created and fabricated in a very similar way that you would find a story, hear a story, get a story, have sources behind it, do photo research, Cleveland Public Library, Western Reserve Historical Society's archives, and the CSU archives. All three of those were essential. Some photos I could take myself because there was some of the work that was still there, but half of the reason that project exists is that we tore down, Cleveland Past, tore down half that neighborhood to put up parking lots. So we had to find what was in those parking lots and sort of fill in those visual gaps. So I really, really called upon my past in the museum world and in having to get things fabricated. In terms of, it was such a pleasure in Columbus to be able to actually physically screen print onto the wall, even though it was like super stressful because they were like, don't mess it up. And I'm like, okay. But that experience, I had a show at MoCA Cleveland a few years back that was actually something I ended up scraping off that old glass wall, but that experience of making kind of a screen printed mural was, I think, so in other words, like to answer the question too, there are things you're doing every day in your studio practice that are going to translate. Then there are the things you're going to have to translate, and inevitably, and in the best way possible, those translations from those public works come right back into your studio and I think augment and make your studio practice even more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Corrie, just to add on to that a little bit, and Angelica, I'd like to hear from you on this also. You mentioned that anthology did start in 2012 and ended in, just recently completed. And Angelica, I know you've been involved in some projects where there's a lot of time when just nothing is happening, then suddenly we need you to do something in the next 24 hours. So, I would say that in terms of time and red tape, public art is more demanding than studio art usually. Would you two agree with that? And if so, is it worth it?
I would agree with that. It is more demanding. There is a lot of hurry up and wait, that you were mentioning. Just wait, and then all of a sudden, hurry up! You need to get it done last week. And but there's a lot of, and then there are some people, so it's not for everyone. What I would say that is certainly worthwhile for those who feel comfortable with that, and I feel comfortable with those situations. But I think it's certainly worthwhile. For me, it's been, the rewards have been far outweighing the pains and trials and tribulations that I've had to go through. So.
I agree. I also think it not only is it worthwhile, obviously, and I think we talked about this maybe offline before when we were doing the walkthrough, Angelica, but it's an honor to have people welcoming you into their community. The biggest thing I would say is that you really want to listen to what you're hearing, to what people are saying, and ask questions. It's not a time. I don't believe it's a time to come in and tell people what you're going to make. I think it's a time to come in and say what needs to be here, and how can I help make this thing. So I don't know. I take a lot of honor, and I take it very seriously. If I was asked to do it, I always ask myself if I'm the right person to be doing this. And sometimes I honestly don't know. And that's where you have to, I believe, as an artist, have the humility and the ability to either make yourself the right person, or even say, I don't know. I don't think that this is going to work. I mean, I've walked away from things where I don't believe that I was the right person for it.
Mm-hmm.
There was a question that we didn't answer about, there were two questions given to us at the same time, and the second part of it was about where we go call for whether we do calls. Can you reread that one?
Yeah, so I think someone was wondering, especially probably when you're starting out, do you do self-initiated projects, or do you respond to calls for artists for public art projects? Or are most of your projects you're being invited? Could you say how you get involved in the projects? And then the second part of that question is, what are the differences that you've experienced in the outcomes of if you've applied, if you've had a self-initiated, if it's a project that, how these started and how the outcomes are?
For me, it's a combination. Initially I've applied and to call for artists in the earlier part, and then I would put myself on slide registries. But then I've been at it for a while, and I've been lucky that in maybe the last decade or so that mostly it's been invitations. I've gotten invitations. I've responded to invitations rather than have to actually apply to calls. And then what was the last part of that question again?
And just maybe
the difference between the two. Sometimes in that invitation, and the most ideal is when you're asked to be part of a team and you're brought in early. And so I was able to do that for Stephanie Tubb Jones Plaza, and right now I'm working on another project with University Circle Incorporated that I'm also being brought in early on. And so there you're able to work with the landscape architect and the architect and all those, and really be able to formulate something that's integral with what's being built. And so those are the really ideal dream, and it does make a difference at what point. I don't know if it makes that much of difference whether you initiated or they initiated, but what makes a difference at what point of the construction or the project you're brought in. And if you're brought in early, you can, if your piece needs lighting, you can, maybe the budget can work around and put lighting on it. All those different things can happen that can accommodate your work much better if you're brought in earlier in the process. And I think that makes a bigger difference than whether you initiated or you were invited or what.
And that's kind of like, to your point, it's not, you know, public art isn't like the handkerchief in your coat. It's like, it's really part of a space. And so the earlier you get brought in, the really more integral it can be as part of the space. What about you, Corrie?
I, just to second what Angelica said, I actually don't think I've ever been brought in early, which is fine. But I also know that I am a graphic 2D painter art. Like, I understand that in a lot of ways, when I've been brought in, I've been given these big walls that need stories and things, or that need something. So it's sort of like the blank canvas idea. But to answer the other question, I have answered calls. What's interesting is that I was invited to do the warehouse district, and that was my sort of getting my toes wet with that. I don't necessarily think of my museum experience as public art per se, but that was definitely what I go to approach public art, in that it's a research process, and it's certainly collaborative, right? So mostly I've been invited because someone or some organization knows my work and sort of knows my approach. So that's the case with the two murals, and one of which was for the chemical engineering department, a total collaboration with Amber Anderson, who I also worked with at the Maltz. So we really approached that from a standpoint where the chemical engineering department created content, and then we researched the visual content to, you know, work with that. So in other words, like, it's usually been something where I've been invited. I have applied to things. Also, I'm trying to think if I've ever won one that I've applied to. I can't remember. It tends to be more invitational, I will say. In my
one thing from the land studio perspective, I would say, you know, for both Corrie and Angelica, like, you know, we, you know, in any project that they've been involved with us, we probably knew about them and saw their work beforehand. So just to emphasize how important it is to get your work out there in terms of, like, even if it's a social media presence or you're applying to calls, maybe you don't get that call, but that whole selection committee gets to know your work and might think of you for that project that actually really fits your work. So just I really, like, we are always searching for artists and to understand their work and how they work. And if you don't have experience, just try to still have a presence. Social media, other places really is helpful. But
there's one more part to the question on from Lauren, just in terms of out-of-town commissions, and how do you deal with that, like in terms of estimate any extra costs that might come up or something like that? Both of you.
And also to add to that, maybe, like, could you talk about, like, how you're estimating costs in general and fabrication when it's not, you know, the medium that you're used to?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Do you want me to answer that one first? For the out of town, you know, we're usually given a budget. Sometimes that budget is really good, and sometimes that budget is not so great. In the case of the Columbus project, I pretty much wore a little bit of a groove on the highway between Cleveland and Columbus. I was down there almost every 2 to 3 weeks, both doing the programs and doing the research. So the budget was what it was. I insisted that I was doing those programs, whether or not, I mean, it was all whatever the budget was going to be. I had to estimate cost for assistance in that case, because so so with that particular project, we could only be in, they never shut, that's a 7-day-a-week institution. So they could never shut it down. So we had to be able to go in, do our work after closing, and then come in the next morning, not interrupt any of the things that happen in a library. Things like, I mean, there's spray paint in that. So I bought HEPA filters. Like I had to buy my own, bring in HEPA filters. We ran them like, you know, we had to do all of that like after midnight. We had to clean out, like we were obsessively kind of cleaning out the HVAC in order to do an interior sort of spray paint situation. So in other words, like when you do an out of town thing, you have, like I had to have 40 screens between 2 cars, like my assistant, Mike Lombardi, who's an amazing artist. And he drove half the screens down. I had the screens. We had to have everything kind of ready to go in a space that was going to be open to the public the whole time.
I did a project in Huntsville, Alabama. So that was, and I had to work with community. So it was just kind of, as far as the budgeting, it's just figuring out how many trips down, how many flights down I could afford. And then just organizing what I had to do down there. And I did do what I did down there was was down there for 2 weeks and I had people's footprints. I had people actually put their feet in glaze and have them to be part of the piece. So I had to coordinate, but you know, working with the community, and they gave me a classroom in the school to be able to do that. And, you know, so it's a lot of coordination and then being organized so that when you do have to take those trips, you take care of everything. You know, you just have to be more organized with, or you let the budget just go and just realize that, okay, you know, and actually when you do make a budget, and you were asking about budgeting in general, but when I make a budget, you know, I think about how much materials, what particular materials I'm going to use, what kind of help I might need. You know, you have all those things listed. Do I need, what kind of insurance I might need? You know, so you have all those line items in mind, and you just kind of add them all up. And if you have to, sometimes it's a lot of sort of like floating back and forth. Okay, if I have to do all that, I can't do this one idea that I really want to do. You might have to back off a little bit on that. But it's a lot of balancing. And then sometimes, like in Corrie, you were saying that you got your studio, your print studio built because of that project. Some of my early projects were also in the process of making it, I had to buy a piece of equipment. Therefore, I did not make as much as in my pocket, but I got this piece of equipment. So sometimes there's a trade-off in that you might not end up with as much change in your pocket, but you ended up with some new equipment that then you can use in future projects. So
Absolutely.
It's a lot of balancing.
Yeah, things like insurance and all of that. That stuff you just want to make sure you ask whoever you're working with ahead, like who's responsible for the things, all the things. Like for example, in our case in Columbus, scaffolding was needed, and before I even did the budget, I mean, I'm thinking I'm going to need scaffolding. Do they have it on site? Does their utilities, can we use the metropolitan libraries? The answer was yes. So that's a line item I took out, but I needed people, right? Because again, like I said, we had to do a lot in a very small amount of time. You know, we couldn't just keep going and going. So yeah, you have to, that's that balance.
Yeah, and I feel like also just being very conservative in your budget, always thinking, you know, adding in a little extra on everything. That's what we do at Land Studio, just pretending everything's going to be a little more expensive. And then if it ends up being a little more expensive, at least you have that line item and you have a little.
You have the cushion, yeah.
Yeah.
I always take whatever I've come up with in the budget, I always do a 15% contingency and add it then to my line items. Yeah. I do that for everything. Like even when I'm like thinking about a body of work that is going to be in a gallery or whatever, I do it all the time because you always need more stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, it looks like we're just about out of time. Thank you so much for everyone for coming. Thank you, Corrie and Angelica. You guys are both amazing, some of our favorite artists, and we really love talking to you guys. There's a survey in the chat, and also it'll be emailed to everyone. And so we would really love your feedback. If there's ideas on anything we should be covering over the next couple of months during these virtual sessions, we have this session recorded, and so that will be up on the website, studiotothestreet.org. And our next session is we're doing another studio visit next week with Lauren Noel and Antoine Washington. So hopefully you'll join for that one. Come with questions. We'd love you guys. You can chime in, raise your hand next time if anyone wants to say it out loud, but I know sometimes it's scary being on video, but we really appreciate your time and coming on this Friday.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Have a great Friday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You too.
Thank you.
Welcome. Hi, Debbie.
Hi, Angelica. This is great. It's great to see you.
Likewise.
We'll see you soon.
All righty. Sounds good.
Bye.
Bye-bye.